The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade.
That's
The Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle. Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 128, and our guest is Marissa R. Moss. Marissa is an award-winning journalist from New York who now makes her home in Nashville. She frequently contributes to Rolling Stone, American Songwriter, Billboard, NPR, and others. Her work has also appeared in Nylon, Pitchfork, Entertainment Weekly, The Guardian, and Politico. Her book, Her Country, How the Women of Country Music Became the Success Story They Were Never Supposed to Be, was released in May of 2022, y'all. Her Country is a must-read for anyone who loves country music, American politics, modern history, or just a really well-written book. This conversation is an insightful deep dive from an excellent writer, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. We caught up with Marissa via Zoom to talk about the process of making Her Country and just creativity in general. Y'all, whenever we have a guest who is not a recording artist, I try to find musical partners who fit the vibe or theme of the episode if possible. And in this case, I didn't have to look too far. Great friends of the show, Plating and Hannah Harber, immediately came to mind and both graciously agreed to lend their music to the conversation. The song you're hearing at the beginning of the show is How Lonely by Plating. It's from her most recent album, The Way Down. And later, you will hear Sorry Darlin' by Hannah Harber. That's from her record, Long Time Coming. More on Van and Hannah at the end of the show. Until then, y'all, it is my great pleasure to bring you my conversation with Marissa R. Moss. While you're doing that, do I sound especially nasally? I'm on the tail end of my very first COVID experience, so
I
hope I don't sound prohibitively.
No. Are you feeling okay?
Yeah, I feel fine. Yeah, I mean, I went through a couple of days where it was fevery and all that stuff, but I just feel like I have bad allergies right now.
Oh man!
And I just miss my partner and my dogs.
Oh, you're quarantined away from everyone?
Yeah, I'm staying in the house, but I'm just like, we're just trying to stay away from each other, so she doesn't get it. And so I'm just in my studio, which is not a bad place to be quarantined because I've got, all the entertainment any human being could ever want here, books and records and, internets. So it's not a big deal. It's just, it's actually been kind of like nice to have this sort of high tech monastic existence, if that makes any sense. But I do miss, hugs.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm good. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you about your book, Her Country. It's so fantastic. And you've seen me raving about it on the internet, and I'm really excited to dive deep into it. So I just first want to say thank you for writing this incredible book that I think is so important.
Oh gosh, thank you. And thank you for the kind words and support.
For sure. My pleasure. I'm interested in so much about this. And I did a little bit of self-reflection after I finished the book. This show's been around since 2016, really 2017. And one of the things I early on committed myself to was it's not just going to be a show about white guys with guitars. It started out that way because I know a lot of white guys with guitars and I love them. And I had access to them, you know, but I was like, that's not what it's going to be. Cause I also love all kinds of music. And I want to be mindful of the fact that I'm booking women, that I'm booking people of color, that I'm just not going back to that same very simple well. And right, you are the first woman to be on the show in 10 episodes. So, so I had to like, it's interesting as I was preparing for this. It's like, all right, I gotta at the outset just sort of own that I think that is a perfect illustration of why the work you do is so important. Like I'm hyper aware of it and trying to do better. And yet I'm still booking white guy with guitar after white guy with guitar for my podcast that is not about white guys with guitars. And so I'm interested in sort of the urgency to write the book and, you know, from the idea in your head to sort of it being published. It's timely and it's well written and it's important. Can you talk to us about like the fire lit under you to write this?
Yeah. And I moved to Nashville about 11 years ago from New York and immediately kind of dove right into the country music scene and started reporting and really quickly noticed that there was a gender imbalance, not just in country radio, but kind of in every aspect of the industry. At the same time, I also really quickly noticed that in Nashville, if you speak out about anything, it is not greeted kindly. And so just kind of naturally gravitated to telling sorts of stories, and with the help of a wonderful literary agent who kind of made me believe in myself, but you know, helped me get past some of the imposter syndrome, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, it really felt important to do this story now because what country radio is going to show in the history books is going to be very different from the story that is in her country. It's not going to include, except for some Maren Morris songs, it's not going to have these women. And, you know, all you look at number ones, you don't look at number 8 when you're looking at history books of, you know, the Billboard top 100 songs or whatever. You look at number ones, and that story is going to be white, cishet, straight men with guitars, just in country guitars. And I thought it was important to tell a story that was, you know, that wouldn't be reflected in those, you know, in that narrative that would eventually become just a success story of men if we let time do its thing.
What an incredible sense of history there. I mean, when you say that, it kind of chills me a little bit because it, like the idea that Amanda Shires, for example, would not be someone who's talked about in the history of country music, it feels very real as you say that. And at the same time seems like the craziest thing I could think of, right? As I think about, especially as I think about all of her records, you know, but especially the impact that some of her most recent records have had on so many people and the audience they're reaching, the broad audience they're reaching, in my mind, at least. And so that sense of history, is that something you've had especially when it comes to country music, is that something you've had a sense of for a long time, or was that like an aha moment?
I mean, I think it's important to, I'm always kind of looking at taking stock of like what I believe, you know, and what I think is the truth versus what I've been, and trying to unpack that and figure out if that's true versus what I've been told, like what, you know, separate those things from each other. And I think we do that. That happens a lot with women's stories because of the lens that they're told through over time. You end up with a situation where, you know, Kate Bush is finally like having worldwide acclaim because her song was in a television show, not because she's one of the, like, you know, genius artists of our time. And it's wonderful that that's how we came to, you know, I'm not talking about country music now, but it's all, you know, the same pattern emerges. And I hope that's, you know, maybe that would have happened with someone like Amanda. I think her genius would prove that she's one that we will be talking about for a very long time, with or without, historical records of it. But because it's not, her songs aren't getting played on country radio, and um, you don't know how, like, the misogynistic lens of history is going to alter that view. So that's why I thought it was really important to have that kind of document, that says, these are the foundational characters and stories and influential people, of our time, in country music.
I want to put a pin a little bit in that idea of history, just because I do want to kind of explore sort of where we go from here at some point. Because you made me think before, so that I don't forget myself, made me think about like how we are documenting history now and what that might look like. But let's put a pin in that for now, because I really want to make sure in our limited time together that I talk about a couple of things that really stood out to me, and that is the way the book is written. That there are a couple things that I loved. Several things I loved. I was obviously crazy about this thing. One of the things is the sort of non-linear nature of the book. In other words, chronologically, in other words, right? So you jump around quite a bit as you follow the stories of several people focused on Mickey Guyton, Maren Morris, and Casey Musgraves. But we're jumping around in time quite a bit. And I feel like in the hands of a lesser craftsperson that it would be easy to get lost in that, but I never at any point felt lost. I always felt as though I knew exactly what you were talking about. I knew where you were going. You were explaining exactly what I needed to know in that moment. Was that intentional? And if so, can you talk about that choice to write in that way?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, because I agonized over it a lot. um, it was a lot to pack into a book. 3 central stories plus a lot of other characters on the periphery or at the center. 20 years of time plus historical context. But I didn't want it to be boring also. I wanted to tell a good story. And so I really, I mean, I hope you don't see it as you're reading, maybe you do, but like every chapter is there's so much scaffolding that went into putting each chapter together. Many, like, my wall and floor of my office at one point looked like I was trying to track down a serial killer, and had also, like, in the process, lost my own mind, because just index cards everywhere. I mean, I'm working on my next book, and obviously people won't be able to see it, but I like have Post-its everywhere and index cards everywhere, and it's a little crazy. But just to make sure that I included everything that I felt was important in a way that was interesting to read, and that I intentionally dropped a lot of Easter egg, or not Easter eggs, but little tidbits in there that exist in their own. And the idea was hopefully that people have their computers and they can Google those things that I drop and go down different wormholes.
Which I did for sure reading.
Good. Yeah, that's what whether it was a book or something by a scholar, or an artist, or different things that felt important, but I couldn't talk about everything. I kind of purposely remember putting in, I was like, I really I want to talk about the band Perry, but I can't. Like, this is, I drew this line as to where it's not bands, it's women solo artists. So I dropped a band Perry nugget and was hoping that people would go down that road. And I hope that there was a lot in a digestible way, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, sorry, my dogs are losing their minds.
My cat is nonstop crawling on me.
They got me distracted because this is such a great conversation, and I hope it doesn't ruin the experience for people listening. And there's nothing I can do about it right now.
It's life,
there's a couple of things that I'm curious about there. I mean, one, so to your point about wanting people to go down those rabbit holes, there was that whole, I forget the name of it, but that whole sort of collective that Marin and those and Casey had, where they're in that house for a long time in East Nashville.
Oh, the Hotel Villa.
The Hotel Villa. There's several artists in there. I follow this stuff really closely. The 90% of the artists I have on this show, 80%, I guess, are Americana artists or country artists, right? Again, not intentional, but just the way that it all has worked out. And I follow this stuff really closely. And yet there was a couple of names in there that I was like, who? And then when I dove in, of course, they're amazing, and so I was really grateful for that as well. But I'm curious about the process as, a writer myself, as someone who aspires to write books myself. That whole thing you're talking about, you've got like these notes everywhere. You're looking, as you described it, like you're trying to track down a serial killer. How do you overcome, like, how do you stave off feeling overwhelmed by that? Because this is a big project, as you outlined. How did you keep centered and not get overwhelmed by it?
Oh God, I did get over. I mean, many nervous breakdowns. Lots of microdosing. No,
Oh, nice. Really?
well, yes, yeah.
Nice.
Big fan of microdosing for many ailments, but that's
Nice.
not, I know that's not the focus of this show.
No, I wish I had another 40 minutes with you to talk about psilocybin though. But anyway, go ahead.
Highly endorse. Anyway, but I mean, I did like have a lot of breakdown moments, imposter syndrome moments, panic moments. And like just starting to write another book and reliving all of that. And I'm like, oh my God, why did I do this to myself again? Like the last book I wrote in COVID quarantine with 2 kids at home. And I always thought, oh, once they're back in school and things are sort of quote unquote normal, even though obviously COVID is still around, at least, with things back in school and somewhat normal, when I go to write another book, oh, that'll be so easy. I'll have all the time in the world. And I think I realized that while I have more time, that was kind of a distraction from like what was going on in my own head and sense of constant overwhelm, because I had to care for them and do virtual school, and just I had to go upstairs at night and write, and I didn't have a choice. It's a lot. I mean, I think as a writer, I've always not been an outline person. I've always resisted that, and I kind of lean into like my gut and flow. I obviously, beyond all like sort of journalistic standards, obviously follow those, but then when it comes to the writing process, it's kind of a weird gut thing. Like I always know, like my gut will tell me like what my opener is, and if I'm working on a shorter piece. But when you're looking at a book, you can't just like fly by the seat of your pants. You have to outline, you have to organize, you have to put things on note cards and go crazy and all of that, or you are totally destined for absolute chaos. And it was really against my my natural way of working, but I had to learn that. Like I had to learn to like log my word counts every day, and like I hate all that. Like I don't like thinking about any of that when I write. I don't like thinking about how many words I've written. I don't like doing any of that, but I had to kind of reinvent myself as a writer a little bit to actually make a book happen, or otherwise it would have just been like totally off in space.
When you say you had to log your word counts, is that something that the publisher requires? Is that a self-discipline thing? Like, why did you have to do that?
Self-discipline. Like I realized like and I think, you have to hit this target. I think Her Country is 85,000 words, something like that. And the most I'd ever written in a feature was maybe like 5. And that was my longest, So I think I needed to know that I was making progress and like needed to see it on a chart, which is nothing that I've ever felt before. I don't like Excel charts, and I don't like those things. And I think part of that was like breaking this sort of like bogus myth of like a writer that I'd created in my head that you can't do those things. It's like a writer isn't entering numbers into a chart, like, and then you need to break down that bullshit because, it's still like a biz, you're still chasing a goal and it's still your job and a business and all of those things. It doesn't take away from the art, but like you have to have those structures around you to be successful. At least for me, maybe there are people who can just do it. I don't know. But I needed to know that I was, on track with my word count and making progress and see that progress in front of me, and develop some really weird like habits that felt really strange to me, but that ended up being helpful.
That myth that you just described as being bullshit, it makes me think about like an analog to that would be the myth of the songwriter who has to be drunk or high in some way in order to do their best work. Whereas, most of my favorite songwriters either don't drink or take drugs or are really disciplined about it. Not all of them, but some of the greats are now sit down and do the work every day kind of people. And that's how they're able to make the things that they're making. They're very disciplined in the way that they do things. And that's really interesting how, you're overcoming that, that myth of like I don't know, the mysticism of writing, right? That it's not just always some magical thing that comes to you. There might be an element of that to writing in general, but you were doing the work. You were really doing the work.
Yeah, you have to. And I think especially with a book that I had always, you grow up as a kid as a writer and you envision this process of writing a book and being a book author, which is different from journalism, which, is a trade, has an aspect of trade to it. And the idea of writing a book itself felt like, yeah, it had to be kind of in this, this mythologized world that is not at all practical. And then I had to break out of for myself. And once you did, like, once you figure out those sort of rules and parameters for yourself and how you will work, you can be more creative in that frame. And that's something that I'd heard a lot for people, like you hear people talk about applying that to, composing jazz music. And it's like, you have to make those rules because then within the frame, you can be more creative. And that definitely was very true for me when it came to book writing. So at first I just sat down, you are in front of the blank page and you have no, nothing around you and you're kind of paralyzed. You're like, you can't bounce around in a box that's like as big as the universe. You're just gonna like hide in a corner. But if you give yourself like a little bit more of confined space and kind of rules and a process, you're much more free.
You've a couple of times in this conversation said the words imposter syndrome. And I am always fascinated in imposter syndrome. I feel like all creatives do have a little bit of that in them. But Marissa, there doesn't feel like there's much hope for the rest of us when you, an acclaimed writer going into this project, someone who is well respected in the field, in this specific field, right, in doing this kind of work, is feeling imposter syndrome as you go into her country. And then after you have now written this wonderful book and you've gotten all this amazing feedback, now you're saying that you're feeling a little bit more of that. You're going through it in your head again about your forthcoming book, which I'm assuming you're talking about What She Needs Is a Good Defense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. How do you process that? Like, do you think that's something you'll ever get over? Is there any hope for all of us with the imposter syndrome? Is it somehow useful in some way? Can you just explore that a little bit?
I mean, and I think you can have imposter syndrome and also be really confident in your craft and your abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do have both. Like, I believe in my abilities as a writer. Doesn't mean I always feel great about it. But for the most part, I believe in my work, But on the other hand, I constantly, not constantly, but more than I would like, definitely feel like, like I don't deserve to be here, you know. And I think like part of that is, you know, growing up as a, you know, woman in a male dominated field and constantly feeling less than and judged, I guess. I've never quite let that go.
Mm.
And other is like you know, I try not to like, with this next book, it's not focused on country music. And, you know, even within that, knowing that I'm thoroughly capable of telling these stories, there's always like a small group of people that are like allowed to tell a certain kind of story in music. And I feel that too, and I always see it, and I kind of always feel on the outside of that in some weird way. It's like, oh no, like this elite group is allowed to talk about these things, and I'm not in that. And maybe that's healthy, I guess, because maybe then you get too comfortable. So I guess like trying to embrace the good part of imposter syndrome as best as you can, and you have to like have a bit of an outsider mentality to do the kind of work that I want to do. And it makes things, you know, not as comfortable, I guess, but it helps me get the work done. Yeah, I don't know, but I wish I could say like, I think I'll probably have imposter syndrome forever, and that's just how it's gonna be. I don't know.
Right. Well, and part of that may also, it sounds almost like like there's like a healthy chip on your shoulder, you know, sort of like I belong, I know I'm good enough, but I haven't necessarily been included in those spaces, or the narrative that's been presented to me isn't that I'm included in those spaces or I belong there. Like at your core, you know you're good, and you've gotten outside affirmation that you're good. But at the same time, if you're being told by society and you're feeling directly that you don't belong in that space, I could see how there'd be a little bit of like, come on now, I'm good enough for this.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And yeah, like I do. I am for the most part confident in my craft. That doesn't mean that I can always get better, and I always am hard on myself and always, you know, see other people and wish I could do what so and so just did. Um it, you know, that keeps you on your toes, I guess. I can't ever imagine, if I don't know if there's someone out there who like thinks they're the best in the world. That must be cool. I mean, good for them. I don't know. But yeah, there's definitely it's interesting now in this next book, feeling things in a different way. Whereas in her country, I was like, well, I'm not part of the country music establishment and let in certain rooms. That is by choice. I didn't want to be in those rooms. Kind of before that, it was like, well, I'm a woman, I'm not let in the boys club of music writing. And now it's kind of like, I'm not let in this even smaller club of people that are allowed to write about, like, you know, women from the 90s and, you know, feminist issues and rock music. And I'm like, I guess I've constructed that in my head, but I don't know.
Right. Okay, so that leads me to a question I wanted to ask you about the sort of, you talked at the very beginning of this conversation about sort of like how, you know, if you speak out in Nashville against certain things, how it's a really easy way to get sort of shut out completely, or, you know, ostracized or whatever. How, like, what kind of resistance did you run up against in the making of the book, and like and subsequently, and then how are you navigating that?
um I mean, it's weird. Like, I guess I knew that anyone that would say no was like not, I mean, I still asked anyone and everyone and got very used to, you're used to getting no's, you know? But I mean, I think the interesting thing is that you do, and the one thing that I hope has helped, that I think has helped me do the work that I do, that I do really love country music and the music made in this town. And I think people do, if they think of anything and they think of my work, I hope that they think that that is true and gives me some access where maybe I wouldn't have it. Because I do really love country music and I do try to put that into my work and to approach my work in a way that comes at it with that love and respect and interest first. Like I've done a lot of profiles on like bro country dudes, and because I love the genre, I'm interested in what they have to say and I'm interested in the music they make. It may not be what I listen to when I am by myself in my room, you know, but I'm still for the most part interested in most of it. And if it's moving like thousands of people, I'm interested in why. And I've always brought that to my work that I've done here in Nashville, is that kind of openness to understand different artists that may not be like in the cool kid club or whatever. And because I also do really think too that like there's this dismissive idea about country music from outside of Nashville that, you know, people are really missing a lot of great artists because they assume that all country music sucks. And so I think that's the reason that not every door is slammed in my face. You know, when I try to get an interview, people give me a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because you know, I've really tried to put that like care into my work overall.
Wow, what an incredible answer. Another thing that I want to talk about with this sort of the choices you made in the book is obviously sexism. We're talking about quite a bit in the book. Racism, we're talking about quite a bit in the book. But you also weave in politics of nationalism, and you talk about the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and then the aftermath of September 11th and the turn that country music took. That talk about rabbit holes. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 was one of those things that I knew about, right? And I knew the basics of, but when I read your book and I started thinking about it more, and I'm obsessed with hypernationalism and the, you know, supersonic rise of fascism, especially over the last few years, and the role that culture and especially music plays in all of that. Can you talk a little bit about like your decision to include those things and like your comfort with that subject matter and like how to weave it, because it's so masterfully woven into the rest of the narrative, and like your comfort level with that subject matter, then also how you sort of wove that into the book so masterfully.
Oh, thank you. It's funny, my literary agent, I mean, her job is to get books sold and, you know, that people want to read. And she would always say to me, she's like, when I was writing this book, she's like, you can put like a little bit of Telecommunications Act in there, but like, you know, that's only sexy to you. And like,
she's wrong.
But I mean, I do think she is right in that no one, you know, no one wants a whole, I mean, I would read a whole book on the Telecom Act, and we're out there. But those were things that like exist, like political events in our, you know, the way that political events have influenced the trajectory of music, or like specifically like really granular political events like the Telecom Act, or who Trump put in to his administration, how that impacted things. You know, very specific choices, and or more broad political events, cultural events, like those all are one and the same of the story. Like I can't see any kind of universe where you talk about these things and you don't mention, you can't talk about music as it is now, in my view, any issues of gender, race, quality without talking about the Telecom Act. And yeah, I didn't want to bore people by getting too in the weeds, but it's also like so crucial to talk about and to understand the ramifications that that had, the ramifications that, 9/11 had on country music or music as a whole. And I think I wanted to show people that even though I wasn't getting into I didn't tell the full story of country music's whole political history or music's whole political history, to understand that these things always go together. Um, and that if you dig throughout music history, you will always see, um, political events being mirrored by or impacting music and vice versa, far beyond just what we know about. When we think about that, we think of Vietnam War, and that's, most people's general knowledge of like the intersection of politics and music. But, it's always there, that relationship is always there.
For sure. And I think I strongly believe politics is in everything. And that, if we're trying to say, don't make it political, that what we're doing is we're just sticking our head in the sand about things that need to be addressed and need to be discussed. And so I'm really grateful that you went so deep on that, and that, your agent didn't totally went out on this. So I appreciate that a great deal, because again, I've done a lot of diving into it now, and it's really helped me understand some things that I've just found infuriating, especially being the age that I am. That act comes out, I turned 16 that year, and so it's just like, what? And then 9/11, I turned 21 that year. It's just like, and so just thinking about all of those things in the context of my own life and applying, the lessons learned in the book and the things that we need to be aware of in the book. It feels so personal when I think about it that way. So I'm really glad you did that. All right, we have a limited amount of time, and I want to honor your time, but I would like a couple of things. One is to just, if you could briefly tell us whatever you can tell us about the project you're working on now. What She Needs Is a Good Defense.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's so I mean, I very much view all of, if I'm lucky enough to write a third, fourth book, whatever, all part of a uh similar mission. But what she needs is a good defense is women, the story of women in rock in the 90s. I gotta work on my elevator pitch. I don't know how I got over time. Um, it's a tricky part when you talk about it now. You're like, you have to do the elevator pitch, but not give too much away. Not like there's that much to give away. But the biggest difference between the two, other than different women, different genre, all that stuff, is it's written first person. So there's a bit of an aspect of memoir to it, although it's not a memoir. But
Cool.
something I've always noticed and liked is a lot of books by men that are very personal. They're personal reactions to music. And I've really liked all those books. I'm not shitting on those books. Rob Sheffield, I've read all his books, and, Stephen Hayden, all those books I've really enjoyed. Not shitting on those books at all. I think they're wonderful. I just think women should have more of a space to talk about how music makes them feel and how it was a part of their lives. So that's something that I'm trying to do with this next book too. But yeah, also feeling imposter syndrome, even though it's my story. So yeah.
I can't wait. I'm so excited to read it. I'm so excited for you to finish it and get it published and read it. And that sounds awesome. I'm really excited for you, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. All right, with 3 minutes left, we usually end on what you're getting down on. So I am very curious about the art that has you inspired at the moment. It could be music that you're listening to, a TV show you're watching, whatever's got you fired up right now.
Oh boy. I always think about the crazy thing is like, even when you know you're going to get asked this, you're like, okay, I'm going to think about it. And then the question comes and you're like, I do nothing. I listen to nothing.
I know. I hate when the guest turns it back on me. Hate it. Because I'm just like, oh, well, so anyway.
What have I been listening to lately? I am still really obsessed with the Plains record. That has been a really enduring album that I've been listening to kind of nonstop. I'm very excited for the new Rustin Kelly album, Joy Ladakun. Those are all April albums, but they both had some music out. Two favorites that I'm really excited about. And I've been reading, unsurprisingly, I guess, a lot of memoir, but not just music. I read and really enjoyed Margot Price's memoir, but trying to read a lot of different memoir to expand my mind or whatnot. So even memoirs by actresses, I read Selma Blair's memoir, nothing I would normally think of really picking up, because I mostly am all music all the time. But yeah, a lot of memoir. And what have I been watching? Well, I watched that third episode of The Last of Us that everyone's talking about and obsessed with, and felt equally obsessed.
I can't remember. I mean, I love Chernobyl. Craig Mazin, the showrunner for both those shows, I think is a genius. I can't remember an episode of television. It's worthy of all of the praise. Episode 3 of The Last of Us.
But we haven't watched the fourth episode because I'm like, well, why?
It's also excellent.
But I feel complete.
It's all excellent. Just keep going.
I will. I definitely will. That's what I'm doing tonight. So
all right, awesome. All right, well, I'm gonna let you go. I'm so great. This has been awesome. I mean, I expected it would be wonderful, but it exceeded my expectations, and I'm just really, really grateful for the work that you do. I'm so grateful for your time, and thank you again and again.
Thank you for such a cool conversation. I don't usually get to talk about craft and all those things, and it's really fun to talk about.
I'm so glad. That's what we do here, and you gave us a lot of gems, and so I'm really looking forward to folks hearing it.
Sorry, darling.
Thanks again.
All right. Take care. Have a great night.
Take care, you too.
Calling you up just to reminisce. I convinced myself it's you that I miss. So I'm sorry, darling, I couldn't resist. I've just been drinking. I'm in the mood for reckless and wishful thinking. Maybe I needed reminding just how bad it's really been, to see how great I'm doing since you left. Well, I'm sorry, darling.
Marissa R. Moss, y'all. Thank you so much, Marissa. Thank all of you for listening. MarissaRMoss.com for all things Marissa R. Moss. What an amazing conversation. If you aren't sold on reading her book, Her Country, after that, I ain't got nothing left for you, y'all. It's great. Get a copy from her website or from your local bookstore. That's where I got mine. Park Ave CDs, my local book and record store. Some free pub for them right now. Here in Orlando, I saw the book on the shelf. I'd been meaning to read it, and I snatched it up. And I'm so glad that I did, and I'm so glad that Marissa agreed to this conversation and gave us so much, y'all. I feel like I learned a ton. Thank you also to my dear friends Van Plating and Hannah Harber for lending their tunes to the show. vanplating.com for all things Van Plating. Van is putting the finishing touches on her forthcoming record, Orange Blossom Child, so stay tuned to her socials and her website for all those updates. HannahHarber.com for all things Hannah Harber. Hannah also has a new album on the way back in October of 2022. she recorded a live solo record at Heartwood Soundstage in Gainesville, Florida. If you've ever seen Hannah live, then you know why I'm fired up about that. Both of them have actually been guests on the show as well. Hannah's actually appeared twice. She had her own feature episode, and then during the Rock and Robinson Festival here in Orlando a few years ago, we sat down a second time, and Van and I recorded, to date, the longest conversation in Marinade history. We had to cut it off, and I put some of it on the Patreon because we just, Van and I enjoy each other's company, and we enjoy picking each other's brains, so I'm really excited for the stuff that both of them have in the works, and hoping to sit down with each of them also again this year so you can hear more about the exciting things they have on the way. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade, including written pieces, photography, our online store, and more. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Spoutable, and Twitter. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are all free ways to support The Marinade. Another way you can get a hold of us, everybody, is you can send us an email. It's marinadepodcast@gmail.com. If you fill out the form that's on the website, that goes straight to my email as well, that email address as well. And we just love getting notes or even DMs about how much you appreciate the show, or something you learned, or even something you want to see. Any feedback you have for us, we really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everybody who shares, retweets. Those things go a long way, y'all. If you share a story or an episode or whatever in some way, a link, it makes a big difference. It not only makes me feel good about this work we're doing, but it exposes other people to these amazing folks that we get to talk with. This conversation with Marissa, I hope, reaches far and wide, because it's really a worthwhile conversation. And gosh, I mean, what an incredible creative and just such an interesting person who opened up quite a bit about their process. And so I hope, I'm grateful to each of you for continuing to spread the word about the show. If you really like what we're doing, please consider joining our Patreon community. Just a few bucks a month, $2 a month, you can gain access to Patreon exclusive content like our show, Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making The Marinade. We also have a brand new monthly show. It's not quite brand new anymore, but still fairly new. That's called What We're Getting Down On. It's a conversation between me and my good friend Peter Haraldson. And then our show Inner Child, where I ask our guests childlike questions such as favorite food, TV show, things like that. All for $2 a month, patreon.com/Marinade Podcast if you can swing it. If you want to support the show financially, but you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I totally get that. You can Venmo or PayPal us. It's just at The Marinade. All the money goes right back into the show, and we're just so grateful for everybody who's able to donate their treasure. But above all, this is a free show. We're thankful that you listen. We're thankful that you spread the word about The Marinade. We're thankful that you interact with the show. We're thankful that you buy the records and books and paintings and all of the amazing creations that our guests put out there in the world. And just one more time, again and again and again, thank you. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.